How often have you 1. Started yawning before lunch, 2. Experienced the afternoon crash, or 3. Get a boost of energy just as you're about to crawl into bed? If you've experienced any of these things before, chances are you have inconsistent energy levels throughout the day. Now that might seem normal because of how common it is, but it really shouldn't be. And there are things that you can do to fix that. As always, before we give you our solution to the problem, let's look at what most people do and why what they do just doesn't work. Number 1, they eat a very heavy breakfast first thing in the morning. Now, we don't think there's anything inherently wrong with eating breakfast itself. It's just the way that most people eat their breakfasts that just messes up their energy levels completely. What does a typical breakfast look like for most people? If you're in a westernized country, it's going to be some combination of eggs, toast, which is probably going to have some butter on it. Maybe you're going to have some hash browns, some deli meat, and possibly some fruit. Now, if you look at all of the things that we just listed, what's the biggest macronutrient in a typical person's breakfast in a westernized country? Carbs, and lots of carbs. The problem with this is that when you consume a large amount of carbs in a relatively short window, it's going to spike your blood sugar levels. And none of this is inherently bad, it's just the way the body works. So when your blood sugar levels get spiked, what's going to happen is you're initially going to experience a boost of energy. And so right after you eat a good breakfast, you feel like you're ready to attack the day. And we think that's great. However, after you get that initial boost of energy, you'll notice that eventually you experience a crash, usually 1 to 2 hours after your meal. That's because the larger the spike in your blood sugar levels, the lower the crash is going to be. It's a concept that we learned of a couple of years ago called glycemic variability, and it just describes how your body responds to consuming glucose. In essence, when your body takes in too many carbs and there's too much glucose circulating in the bloodstream that it's not going to use or it doesn't need to use right now, it's going to store it as glycogen in the body. And so during that process, as a result of you consuming so many carbs in a short window, you're going to spike your blood sugar levels, and when the excess sugar needs to be stored because your body isn't going to use it, it's going to result in a crash. And that's when you feel lethargic, fatigued, tired, drowsy, you name it. It's also why many of you are probably yawning before lunch. Eating a heavy breakfast full of carbs is arguably the biggest reason for that, assuming you're sleeping well. 2, drinking coffee too soon in the morning. We know coffee culture is a big part of most people's lives. We're not telling you to quit coffee or caffeine altogether, although it would probably help a lot of people to quit caffeine altogether. We're not trying to turn this post into an argument to convince you that you should quit caffeine. But what we are going to tell you is that the way most people consume caffeine is wrong. When most people drink coffee, what do? They usually get their coffee first thing in the morning, or they have it along with their breakfast with all of those carbs and whatnot. The problem with consuming caffeine in the morning isn't actually consuming caffeine itself, it's rather when you consume the caffeine. So we don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Andrew Huberman. He runs a podcast called Huberman Lab. It's very popular, and we've learned a lot listening to his podcast over the years. And what we're about to tell you about consuming caffeine is something that we learned from him. So if you find this topic interesting and anything else related to neuroscience in general, we'd highly recommend you check him out. Anyways, the problem with the way most people consume caffeine, like drinking a cup of coffee, is that they do it too soon in the day. The reason is because there's a chemical in your brain called adenosine that builds up as the day progresses, which makes you tired. The reason caffeine makes you feel alert and awake is because caffeine is an adenosine antagonist, which basically means that caffeine blocks the adenosine receptors in your brain, preventing you from experiencing fatigue and drowsiness. That's what we call the caffeine high. The problem is that when you've woken up, there's still some adenosine lingering around in your brain, and your body needs some time to clear that adenosine so that you can be fully awake. If you think about it, no matter how good of a night's rest you've gotten, you're probably not wide awake the second you wake up. You probably need some time to get going, and this is the time that a lot of people drink their coffee, and that's a mistake. The reason is because if you're drinking coffee while your body is trying to clear that adenosine from your system, you're basically preventing it from doing so, which means as the effects of the caffeine wear off, let's say you have a cup of coffee around 8 a.m. or so, as the effects of that caffeine wear off closer to 2 or 3 p.m., you're going to have a lot of adenosine built up that hasn't been cleared by your brain because you blocked it from doing so by drinking the coffee too soon. And as a result, you experience that afternoon crash, you feel super tired, and what does that make you do? it makes you reach for another cup of coffee, which is probably going to have a negative impact on your sleep because of how long the half-life of caffeine is. 3. Eating too much processed food. Now, we understand that eating processed food is almost unavoidable in most places because unless you're only buying organic food from the farmer's market or you're growing the food yourself, it's probably been processed to some extent to extend its shelf life. And so we understand that it's not feasible for most people to completely avoid processed food altogether. However, you can take steps to reduce the amount of processed food that you're eating. We know that it's possible because we've done it, and we'll share with you how you can do it as well later in this post. But for now, let's stick to why this is terrible for your energy levels. The main reason is because processed foods tend to contain high amounts of sugar, they contain preservatives to extend their shelf life, and they're not satiating at all. Most processed foods do not fill you up, they don't make you feel full, and so you constantly grab for more and more snacks. But as we mentioned earlier when we were talking about eating a heavy breakfast full of carbs, it's only going to spike your blood sugar levels. And constantly snacking throughout the day, just as we mentioned earlier with eating a heavy breakfast full of carbs and how that spikes your blood sugar levels, eating these processed foods and these snacks throughout the day is going to force you to develop a dependence on them to keep consistent energy levels. Because if you stop consuming all of that sugar, that glucose, those carbs, you're going to experience the crash. And so what you're doing by eating these snacks throughout the day and all of this processed food is that you keep delaying the crash until usually the end of the day. Now, you might not see the problem with that, given that at the end of the day, you want to fall asleep, so being drowsy is a good thing. And we understand where you're coming from. But the problem lies in the dependence that you have on the snacks to keep you going throughout the day. That's not healthy. In fact, you don't need to be eating that much. If you think about it, digesting food is a very metabolically intense process. Constantly introducing food to your body, not allowing it to rest and recover from the food that it's already digested, is not doing you any good. And of course, before we wrap this section up, we also need to mention that the preservatives that most processed foods contain probably aren't the best for you. We don't have any specific examples to give you right now, but we're pretty sure it goes without saying that the preservatives that companies use to extend the shelf life of their products probably aren't chemicals that you want to be consuming on a regular basis, because many of them could have a negative impact on your body and your well-being. So now that we've looked at what most people do and why it just doesn't work for their energy levels, we're going to give you some nutrition principles that everyone at the Healthy Kangaroo follows in order to have more consistent energy levels throughout the day. So let's get started. 1. A high protein diet where you always eat your protein first. So there's a couple benefits to this. First, protein is the most satiating macronutrient there is, meaning that it's going to keep you full for longer than nutrients like carbs and fats. This will reduce your temptations to snack during the day, reducing your dependence on snacks to keep consistent energy levels, as we previously mentioned. Another benefit of maintaining a high protein diet and eating your protein first is that it'll prevent you from overeating for the same reasons. Because protein is so filling, if you eat it first at the beginning of your meal, you're less likely to overconsume carbs and fats and the kind of tasty food that tends to cause weight gain because you're already full from the protein. And third, protein will not spike your blood sugar levels because relative to other kinds of macronutrients, protein does not contain that much glucose. Protein contains more amino acids. And in fact, part of the reason why it keeps you full for longer is because it requires more energy to break down. Your body needs to work harder to digest protein, which means in the process, you're actually burning more calories to digest that food. Because if you think about it, any kind of digestion is a metabolic process, which means it's going to take energy for it to occur. Now, obviously, you're getting energy out of the food that you're digesting, but the point is that eating a high protein diet is good for a lot of reasons. So to get a little bit more practical with this, let's say you have a plate that you're about to fill up with food. You can divide the plate into portions where one portion is going to be for protein, one portion is going to be for your fats, and one portion is going to be for your carbs. What we want you to do is make sure that at least 40% of your plate is protein, making it the biggest portion of your plate. And then you can divide the remaining 60% into, say, 30% carbs and 30% fats. The point is that you want to make protein the centerpiece of your meal, and you want to eat that part first. So once you're done with your protein, then you can go for your carbs and your fats, which aren't as satiating and contain more calories, and will also spike your blood sugar levels that much more. Principle number 2, eat minimally processed foods. This principle doesn't require much explanation. It's pretty simple. Just eat a potato instead of eating French fries. That's the best explanation we can give you. The less processed the food is, the fewer preservatives it's going to contain, the less likely it is to contain artificial sugars that spike your blood glucose levels, the fewer calories it's going to have, and the more satiating it tends to be. So there's a lot of advantages to eating minimally processed foods. We're not saying that you need to eat raw potatoes for dinner every single day. You can obviously cook it, put some seasoning on it, etc. But the less processed the food is, the better it tends to be for you from an energy standpoint and from an overall physical health and well-being standpoint. If the potato versus French fries comparison wasn't practical enough, another way to tell if a food is minimally processed or not is whether it has an ingredients list. Minimally processed foods typically don't have an ingredients list. For example, if you look at a box of cereal, you're going to get a bunch of ingredients, half of which you can't pronounce because it contains a lot of artificial sugars and chemicals and preservatives to increase its shelf life, which we already talked about, which we already mentioned isn't the greatest for your energy levels or your health. But if you look at something like broccoli or carrots or cauliflower, they don't have any list of ingredients. They're just in their natural state, and that's the kind of food that you want to be eating. A great minimally processed meal would look something like having about 40% of your plate filled up with lean meat like chicken or turkey that's been seasoned well, some broccoli, some spinach, some carrots on the side. You've got a few slices of avocado, and you've got some quinoa or brown rice. That right there is a fantastic minimally processed meal, and it's going to do wonders for your energy levels and your overall physical health and well-being. Principle number 3, backload your carbs. So you know how we mentioned that eating a heavy breakfast full of carbs is terrible for your energy levels? Well, you can try just avoiding carbs altogether at breakfast and having very few at lunch and having basically the rest of your carbs that you need for the day at dinner. That's called backloading your carbs, and there's a few benefits to this. By avoiding carbs altogether at breakfast, you're not going to spike your blood sugar levels in the mornings, which is going to give you very consistent energy levels for that period of time. Now, the reason we say you can introduce some carbs at lunch is because it's pretty impractical to just be eating protein for 2 meals and then having one normal meal at the end of the day. But we encourage you to choose fibrous carbs at lunch as opposed to starchy carbs. So choose things like broccoli, carrots, spinach, basically your vegetables, instead of choosing things like rice, quinoa, potatoes, and whatnot. We're not saying those foods are bad. All we're saying is that they will spike your blood sugar levels. But if you focus on fibrous carbs, which have less glucose when compared to the starchy carbs, you're not going to spike your blood sugar levels as much. And of course, we all know that fiber is good for digestion. And since you're eating a high protein diet that's going to take a lot of effort for your body to digest, eating fibrous carbs like veggies will help with that process. Now, if you avoid eating carbs throughout the day, chances are you're going to need to make up for the calories that you're missing. Because if you're just getting lean protein and some fat, like eggs in the morning, and then some chicken and vegetables at lunch, you're probably not getting enough calories. And so you're going to need to make up for it in order to not lose weight by eating more carbs at dinner. And so if you've gotten most of your protein in at breakfast and at lunch, you can reduce your protein intake at dinner, focus more on starchy carbs. And this is pretty practical for a lot of reasons. When people go out to eat with family and friends, which is an important part of maintaining a healthy social life, it's usually at dinner time. And so making more space for carbs and not having to focus as much on protein is pretty practical from that sense. And it's also like a reward for the end of the day where you get to eat more tasty, enjoyable food, like good carbs and fats and whatnot, because you do need those macronutrients. But by doing this, you're basically preventing the blood sugar spike and the following crash throughout the day and delaying it all for the evenings when it's okay for you to be tired as a result of the crash anyways, because you're going to have to fall asleep later. Of course, if you're a night owl, then this probably isn't the most ideal diet for you because it's not going to be great from an energy level standpoint in your particular case. This works if you're a morning person or someone who does their work earlier in the day. So for you guys, you can simply switch the order of it. You can get your carbs in at breakfast if you're not going to be very productive in the mornings, and then you can stop eating carbs at lunch and then eat none at dinner so that you can be more productive in the evenings, avoiding any blood sugar fluctuations. Principle number 4, hydrate. Dehydration will make you lethargic. We don't need to explain to you why dehydration makes you tired. Please drink more water throughout the day. A practical tip is to keep a full bottle of water next to you at all times. Ideally, it's a really fat water bottle that's very noticeable so that you know it's always there in the background as a constant reminder to make sure that you stay hydrated throughout the day. A good way to tell if you're drinking enough water or not is the color of your piss. If your piss is a dark yellow, you're probably dehydrated to some extent and you need to be drinking more water. If your piss is a light yellow or almost transparent, then you're probably pretty well hydrated. And if maintaining consistent energy levels isn't enough motivation for you to stay more hydrated throughout the day, there are a lot of other benefits to it. For example, you're probably going to look better too, because hydrating well means your body can flush out toxins more easily, you're less likely to develop acne, your skin is going to look better, you're going to retain less water, because when your body isn't getting sufficient water, it will start retaining it, which is going to make you look puffy and bloated. Drinking more water is going to have the opposite effect of making you look leaner and more youthful overall. So that's another reason why you should stay pretty well hydrated throughout the day. Of course, don't overdo it. There is a limit. There is such a thing as overhydration. You don't want to be drinking gallons and gallons of water every other hour. Principle number 5, try to eat at the same time every single day. This has a lot of benefits, but the biggest one has to do with your circadian rhythm. If you think about your sleep schedule, for example, when do you experience the best quality sleep? When you go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. That's when you get the best sleep. If you've ever noticed that after a week of having a consistent sleep schedule, you stop needing an alarm to wake up, you just start waking up on your own. It's because your circadian rhythm has adjusted to your new routine. You can take advantage of your circadian rhythm with your diet as well. The reason why an inconsistent sleep schedule is terrible for your sleep is because if you sleep at a different time every night and wake up at a different time every day, the reason you need an alarm is because your body isn't used to waking up at that time because it's different every single day. There's no consistency. So your body can't prepare to wake up at a given time because it doesn't know when that's going to happen. In the same way, if you eat dinner at a different time every day, your body's not going to be prepared to digest the food that you're consuming each time you eat dinner because you're not keeping it consistent. If, however, you ate dinner at the same time every single day, your body would eventually get used to the fact that you're eating at that time, and it would prepare itself to digest the food that you're about to consume. Similar to maintaining a good sleeping schedule, if you've maintained a good eating schedule in the past, you might have noticed that you start to get hungry around the times that you usually eat meals. That's a signal that your body has prepared itself to digest food and it's ready for you to consume it. As a result of being better prepared to digest the food that you're about to take in, you're not going to have as large of a swing in your energy levels when you eat your food. So maintaining an overall consistent schedule with your sleep, with your diet, with your exercise will not only improve your energy level, but just like all of the other principles, it's just better for your overall physical health and well-being. We know that it's not practical for many people in many different professions to maintain a consistent schedule like this, but do the absolute best that you can. All right, that's a wrap. We hope you found this post valuable. If you did, then consider becoming a closer member of our community by joining our email list. Thanks again, your internet siblings, the Healthy Kangaroo team.